we're going to talk about independent and dependent variables. So an independent variable is something that's independent. This causes change in the dependent variable. So this is going to affect the dependent variable. The dependent variable changes are caused by the independent variable. Okay, so the independent variable changes the dependent variable. We can think of the independent variable as like our input and the dependent variable as our output. So let's talk about an example. Jackie tested how the height of a ramp affects the distance a toy car travels. So the thing that's independent is the height of the ramp. So how far the toy travels depends on how high the ramp is. So the thing that is the dependent variable is the distance the car travels. So the independent variable is always going to be on the x-axis. So if I was graphing this relationship, I would put the height of the ramp right here on the x-axis. Now the dependent variable is always on the y-axis. So I'm going to label the y-axis the distance the car travels. We're going to match the independent variable to dependent variable with an arrow. So actually I'm going to shade them in because I'd rather shade them in. But if I'm looking at the amount of sunlight, that's my independent variable. What would that affect? Is that going to affect a test grade? No. Is it going to affect the height of a plant? Yes. The more sunlight, the taller the plant, right? The plant's going to grow if it has more sunlight. So those two will go together. So the independent variable is the amount of sunlight. How high the plant grows depends on the amount of sunlight. Okay, time spent studying. Well, what is that going to have an effect on? Is that going to have an effect on the test grade, amount of profit, or calories burned? It's going to have effect on the test grade. Okay, the more I study, the better my test grade will be. So what's the independent variable? The time spent studying. Okay, that's what's going to affect the test grade. Okay, minutes spent exercising. Well, the more minutes I spend exercising, the more calories I'm going to burn. So the calories that I burn depends on how many minutes I exercise. And then last but not least, the number of tickets sold. Well, if I sell a lot of tickets, I'm going to get more profit. So those are going to go together. Okay, so again, the amount of profit I make depends on how many tickets I sell. Now we're going to talk about this example. Carly earns $9.50 for every hour she works. So I know that she is working and she is earning money. Well, what depends on what? Well, how much money I'm going to make depends on how many hours I work. So my independent variable is the hours worked. And my dependent variable is how much money I earn. So remember we said that my independent variable is always my x and my dependent variable is always my y. So when I come over here to this graph, I'm going to label my x-axis my hours, and I'm going to label my y-axis my money earned. Now we are going to graph this, but we're going to make a table to help us graph this. Okay, so I can show the relationship between the independent and dependent variable in a table and an equation. So my x is going to be my hours worked, and my y is going to be the money earned. So this takes us back to what's the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable? The relationship is the more hours that Carly works, the more money she earns. Okay, and it said that she was getting $9.50 for every hour she worked. So my hour, if my X was 1, that's 1 hour. How much does she earn? $9.50. If she worked 2 hours, well, I'd have to multiply $9.50 times 2, and that would be $19. What if she worked 3 hours? I'm going to do 3 times $9.50. So that's going to be $28.50. So what my equation is going to be y equals something. I'm doing something to the y, or something to the x to get to the y. Because remember, I said earlier that the x is like your input and your y is your output. So what am I doing? My equation is saying that y is equal to $9.50 times x. So I'm going to write the $9.50 as a coefficient, but I don't need that 0 because it has no value. So my equation would be y equals 9 and 5/10 x. So we're going to actually graph that. So I want us to go back and look at this. If she has 0 hours worked, how much money is she going to make? 0. Okay, what if she worked 3 hours? 3 hours would be $28.50. Okay, so that would be somewhere right about here. Okay, if she worked 6 hours, I would have to do $9.50 times 6 to figure out what it would be in 6 hours. And if I did that, I would get 57, which would be somewhere around here. If I did 9 hours, I'm going to multiply 9 times $9.50, and that's going to give me $85.50. So that's going to be somewhere right around here. And what I can do is I can draw a line through those points using a ruler. And that's going to show the relationship between the hours worked and the money earned. Okay, we're going to practice just figuring out what's the independent and dependent variable. So the Lower Colorado River Authority measures the height of the lake after each rain. So we're talking about the height in the rain, right? So the height of the lake is going to depend on the amount of rain. So that means that the dependent variable is the height of the lake. And the independent variable is the amount of rain. Okay, before my dad takes a trip, he checks his gas tank to calculate how many miles he can drive. So he needs to know, does he have enough gas to be able to drive? So the number of miles depends on how much gas he has. So what's depending on what? The number of miles is depending on something. So that's why the number of miles is the dependent variable and the amount of gas in the tank is the independent variable. The next one, the teacher estimates the number of minutes a student will spend on homework when deciding how many problems to assign. So how long you spend on your homework depends on how many problems you have, right? Okay, this next one, the student checks the length of her essay before deciding how much paper to borrow. Okay, she's going to borrow as much paper as she needs depending on how long her essay is. So the amount of paper she borrows depends on the length of her essay. So that means her dependent variable is the amount of paper to borrow, and the independent variable is the length of her essay. Okay, she can't borrow paper until she knows how much she needs. So she needs to know how long it's going to be to know how much money or how much paper she's going to borrow. All right, this next one. The senior is saving money for her graduation trip. She estimates how much money she will make next week when her boss posts her hours. So she's trying to get money. And what does the amount of money depend on? The amount of money she gets depends on how much she works. So that means the dependent variable is the amount of money earned, and the independent variable is the number of hours worked. I hope this has helped with independent and dependent variables.